At the top of a building, a girl remembers that about a week ago her gas was cut off, and that just today her electricity had gone out. A man approaches and asks why she's running. He continues, saying that if she just gives him some money, he'll leave her alone. The girl lies, saying she has nothing left. She thinks the last 2,000 one she has will only be enough to survive until next week, when she'll receive her part-time paycheck. Pointing at her, the man asks why she ran if she has nothing to hide. He tells her not to lie to her father, also saying he knows what's best for her. The man takes a step toward her. The girl thinks that if she gives him the money, she'll have nothing to eat tomorrow. So she swears she doesn't have any money on her. Irritated, he raises his hand to hit her. Scared and trying to protect herself, she steps back, but then she realizes she's falling. Seeing that she's going to die over a petty fight about money, she starts crying. Even though she fought so hard for this life, she was going to die in a miserable way. Gyeol Yoon was born into a humble family where her father was an ex-convict who drank constantly, and her mother tried for years to do her best, but eventually divorced and left them both alone. The protagonist, for a while, also managed to escape from her father, but even so, he began to chase after her. Once he found out where she lived. While she was away, he had racked up a huge debt. So he stole all the money she had saved for college. Despite that, she kept pushing through, surviving off part-time jobs. Still, all that effort and hard work ended up slipping away like grains of sand through her fingers, all because of her family. Her father then sees her falling from the building. She thinks about how things that others take for granted, like a happy family and loving parents, were things she never truly got to experience. But now it's okay. She doesn't need any of that anymore. So she begs, asking, please, may she finally have a bit of peace. A voice arises in her mind, saying that at the end of the East, the seed of resurrection has been planted. With her mind a little hazy, the girl begins to hear someone calling the name Mabel, someone placing a hand on her face and calling her cute. She opens her eyes and wonders, Mabel? Is that me? But quickly falls asleep again despite her curiosity. A man says she already seems to have grown a bit in the last few days. A woman replies that she's glad the princess is in good health and that they've been blessed. The girl realizes she's hearing voices, and in the arms of a man, she wonders if she's been reborn. She finally asks herself if these voices are her parents, and they sound soft and kind. But she believes these voices will eventually change too. Is she doomed to live another life of pain and misery? The baby was in a crib crying. A maid approaches, calling her Dear and Your Highness. The woman then asks what's wrong and says it's not time to eat yet, so she should please stop crying. As if a baby should understand that. Still shocked, it finally sinks in that she had reincarnated. And in the maid's arms, she realizes she was reincarnated into the body of a princess from an empire, something she had never heard of before. The maid keeps talking, calling her Princess Mabel. The baby then thinks that at first she thought princess was just part of her name, not that it actually referred to a royal title. It seemed impossible at first, but she was finally realizing she had no choice but to accept reality. Still, it's better to be born rich than poor at least. The maid puts her back in the crib and says it's time to change her clothes. The girl then thinks that even though she's accepting all this, it's very different from her past life. The place where she had reincarnated was called the Ermino Empire. She was the emperor's second daughter, and her name was Mabel Gardenia Ermino. Her mother was a woman with very fragile health and died shortly after childbirth. Usually in situations like that, the father tends to neglect the child who caused his wife's death. She wonders how the emperor will act, thinking she'd rather be neglected than suffer like in her previous life. She remembers hearing a gentle voice while sleeping the other day, but she didn't want that unstable kindness, which could disappear over time. The maid picks her up and says she's finished and will lay her back down. The girl says she's not sure if that voice was real or just something she dreamed. Back in the crib, she says it's hard being stuck in the body of a newborn, doing nothing all day but always getting sleepy and blacking out unintentionally. A man enters, and the maid, surprised, calls him, Your Majesty. The man puts his finger in front of his mouth, signaling her to be quiet. He approaches and places his hand near Mabel, who ends up waking up, thinking it tickles. Opening her eyes, she sees who is doing it. The man is surprised, realizing then that she's awake. The girl wonders who he is, thinking she had never seen him before. He asks Madame Ruffet, the maid, if it doesn't look like Mabel is looking directly at him. The woman says she probably recognizes her own father's face and that she was crying a little earlier. but calmed down once he arrived. Mabel wonders why she said that since she had been quiet the entire time. The man was laughing while she questioned if that was her father. He smiles at her. Mabel is shocked, thinking he looked way too young and could at most be her brother or something. He reaches his hand toward her again and she trembles in fear, thinking he's going to hit her. But the man simply taps her hair gently. Surprised, she opens her eyes when she realizes he's just caressing her. The man says, "That's my girl," already recognizing her father. Isn't she smart? The maid agrees with his majesty. Still with his hand on her head, he comments that if Sienna were still alive, she'd be just as happy as he is. Mabel realizes that's probably her mother's name. The man leans in and, smiling, promises that he'll do anything in his power to protect her. She grabs his finger, which surprises him, and he says that was very adorable. Indignant, Mabel thinks she didn't want to do that it's just a reflex all babies have to hold on to whatever is in their hand. Restless, Mabel knows she would never want a loving family. She remembers her last life. How in the beginning, her parents also gave her love and attention. The time when her father used to play with her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. But everything can change at the first opportunity. And if it's like that, she doesn't need any of it. Determined, she says she won't expect anything from anyone. She just wants to live a quiet life in her corner until it's time to leave this world. After all, she believes we are born alone, live alone, and die alone. On the continent of the Ermino Empire, there were 3 powerful nations. The empire itself was one of them, the largest nation on the continent. On its opposite side was its enemy, the Devlin Empire. Between them was the Holy Empire of Abelardo. In this world where nearly everyone believes in God, the people of Abelardo are treated as God's very agents on Earth, who follow only God's will and nothing else. On the day of the baby's birth, a message from the oracle came from the Holy Empire. The words he said were, "At the end of the east, the seed of resurrection has been planted." That same day, a great lightning bolt appeared right above the castle's skies. The priests of Abelardo were certain that the seed foretold by the oracle had arrived. They sent a letter every day to the empire with various petitions to send Mabel to the Holy Empire, but that only made the emperor angrier. Nervous, the butler approached him. The irritated emperor slammed his desk and cursed the representatives of Abelardo. They knew the empire already had the emperor's first son, Oscar, as the crown prince, and because of that, it was unlikely that Mabel would ascend the throne. That's why they were insisting on taking her to Abelardo. The emperor had great affection for his daughter Mabel, especially because she resembled his late wife so much, and he was determined never to hand her over to Abelardo. The butler was frightened. The emperor ordered that the butlers inform them he explicitly rejects every request and will never change his mind under any circumstances. Grateful not to be the target of his anger, the butler agrees, but isn't sure how long they can keep ignoring it. The emperor realized he needed a valid reason to refuse the offer. Otherwise, they would keep insisting. A boy approaches the door and hesitates to enter. The butler gestures to the emperor, who nods in agreement. At that moment, he opens the door, and since it was so sudden, the boy nearly falls forward but manages to keep his balance. He tries to play it off and leave the room, but the emperor calls his name, Oscar. The young man realizes he's been seen and comes back step by step. He approaches and gives a formal greeting to the emperor. The man then asks what he came there to do. The young man calls the emperor father. This boy was actually Oscar Ermino, the first prince of the empire. Oscar asks when the emperor plans to give him permission. His father asks what permission he's talking about. He replies that he means permission regarding his little sister Mabel sighing. The emperor refuses, already predicting that the boy came for this. The boy asks why, since his father had said maybe after a month. He recalls his father saying that even if he asked to hold Mabel, he'd probably end up dropping her. After all, the boy had a history of dropping and breaking anything he held. The young man says that despite that, he promises he won't drop her. But looking seriously at Oscar, the emperor knows he has good reasons not to allow it. Tearing up a letter, the emperor looked pleased. Sad. The boy thinks he won't be able to see her today either. It had been exactly 1 month since she was born, and he'd been so excited about meeting her that he couldn't even sleep properly. Now he had a face like a guilty puppy. Oscar says he made a point to finish his fencing class early today. His father smiles and says there's nothing to be done. Standing up, he thinks that in any case, Mabel is too young to remember meeting him. Placing his hand on his son's head, the emperor tells him to come along. In another room, Mabel was in her crib, extremely bored with her baby life. She thinks people say a baby's life is very simple, maybe because they don't have memories like hers. But the only thing the girl could do now was lie there and watch people. This was very frustrating. The baby held a pillow angrily while thinking she couldn't even roll to her right side. It was like being stuck in place. Mabel sighs and yawns, thinking that she's always sleepy too. Somehow, even the voices of the people around her sounded like a lullaby. Blinking slowly, she thinks her eyelids feel heavy. Mabel closes her eyes and falls asleep again. The maids go check on her and find it adorable how quickly she fell asleep. A clicking sound is heard, and all the maids look surprised. It turns out the emperor and his son entered and asked how Mabel was doing. She wakes up startled, recognizing whose voice it was. It was the voice of that man who kept coming and seemed so annoying. The girl thinks the way the emperor came so often and pampered her was really uncomfortable. The emperor approaches her crib and asks if she heard him arrive, saying it was very adorable. In her mind, Mabel just thinks she wants to go back to sleep. She sees a spiky white hair sticking up. Oscar, her brother, leans in to look at her in the crib. The boy is enchanted, and Mabel wonders who he could be since she had never seen him before. Thinking for a moment, she starts processing and squints. She realizes the boy resembles the man who was apparently her father. So he must be her older brother. Mabel remembers when she saw her nanny and a woman named Larima talking about him. Still wide-eyed, the boy tells his father the baby is looking at him. While the maid smiles, the emperor says not to be fooled, since her vision isn't developed enough to see him properly. Yet, Mabel finds this strange, since just a few days ago that man believed the same thing Oscar does now. Despite that, Oscar doesn't listen and just calls her cute. Annoyed, the baby just thinks about when the two of them will leave her alone. She wants to tell them to go away, but she can't speak yet. Not even teeth. But that doesn't stop her from trying to babble like any other baby. So Mabel says, "Abba." Hearing the sound, the boy wonders what she could be trying to say. Turning to his father, Oscar says maybe the girl was trying to say, "Brother." She only thinks that she didn't want to say anything remotely close to that. The emperor tells Oscar not to be ridiculous, that she was clearly trying to say father. Even more irritated, the protagonist only thinks that couldn't be further from the truth. In her mind, she screams that they're both wrong and she was just trying to say, "Leave me alone." It was very frustrating, and staring at her nanny, Mabel mentally begs her to do something about it. The woman notices the baby staring and thinks she must be hungry, asking a woman named Larima if the milk is ready. The protagonist grows frustrated because that wasn't what she was trying to say. All of this was just a communication error, and not even her nanny understood her. Uncomfortable, Mabel once again wonders why these people won't leave and realizes they apparently plan to stay and watch her eat too. Now in the nanny's arms, the woman says it's time to eat. Sad and uncomfortable, the girl realizes they're going to watch her eat. Mabel thinks that in that case she has no choice, so holding the bottle, she starts drinking as fast as she can. The people around her think she must be really hungry, but in truth, the girl just wants to finish as quickly as possible, so those two people can finally leave her alone. She thinks she's probably already drunk more than half the bottle of milk and is even running out of breath because of her baby body. Mabel can't believe she has to go this far just to get a little peace, but something is happening and she wonders what it is. The emperor reaches out his hand and asks to be given the bottle. Mabel is shocked to see she's now in his arms. The man says he'll do it himself. In disbelief, she can't believe this is happening. Still stunned, she thinks she doesn't want this and tries to escape from her father's arms. Mabel thinks she didn't want this, and that it was very uncomfortable. Sitting in a chair, the emperor was completely focused on the task. The princess thinks there's no way to win against a fully grown adult, so she questions why she had to be a baby, since she can basically do nothing. Happy, the emperor says it's all done. The girl also doesn't like the way he looks at her and hopes he'll stop that as soon as possible. Since she had just finished eating, Mabel thought they would finally leave. But unfortunately, she sees the emperor getting closer and realizes he wants to kiss her forehead. Still with her mouth full, she hesitates, and not knowing what to do, wonders why he's doing this. Outside the palace, several birds were at a fountain, but it suddenly shoots a jet of water. The two servants watching the fountain were impressed with how refreshing and powerful it was. Back in the room, someone was coughing. The emperor's face was completely soaked, with Mabel still in his arms. The servants were surprised by what had happened. A woman asks if everything is all right. Laughing, he says there's no need to worry. Annoyed, Mabel thinks the Emperor is about to say something ridiculous again. Then he says it's fine, because the milk Mabel spat on him is nothing less than holy water. She's in disbelief, not understanding the reason for such an absurd comparison. Her father adds that despite everything, he was very happy to see her eating so well. Mabel was still processing what she had just heard. Since the Emperor had just compared the milk she spit out to holy water, which felt completely disconnected from reality. With a cloth, he starts drying his face. Meanwhile, the princess wonders if there's something wrong with this Emperor. She turns toward the others, thinking they should feel the same way. But looking at them, Mabel realizes that everyone has a smile on their face, looking touched. Apparently, no one saw anything wrong with the man's statement. While her father placed her on his shoulder and patted her back, her brother stared at her. With a determined look, Oscar calls out to his father. The Emperor asks what it is. Mabel believes he finally noticed there's something wrong with their father and thinks he's going to say something about it. Oscar approaches, and in fact, the boy asks if he can hold her too. Shocked, she thinks that's not important right now. Serious and holding his daughter firmly, the Emperor stares at the child. The boy then says he understands that he can't, but wanted to ask anyway. His father says that indeed he can't, but he's happy that Oscar understands why Mabel thinks that being between these two is making her head spin. She begs that if God really exists, he would make these people lose interest in her. Still in the castle, Mabel states that she's sure no divine being exists. After all, her father still visits her frequently, even at night when the servants are already in bed. She thinks she prayed for him to lose interest, but nothing had changed. Not even her brother. From the beginning, Oscar had never lost interest in her for even a second. That was making the girl irritated to the point of making a face. She remembers that it didn't stop there. Her brother was even sneaking in sometimes to see her without the Emperor's knowledge. Looking at a fancy chandelier, Mabel wonders why the furniture is so expensive. In the distance, a voice asks everyone to get out of the way. The Emperor says that beautiful things are good for a baby's social and emotional development. And with a sword in hand, he says that since this is the most beautiful object, it's the one he'll use. Another voice objects, saying that despite that, the Emperor cannot destroy the imperial heirloom and that His Majesty should please stop this. Mabel remembers hearing that some things were made of materials the Emperor destroyed with his own hands while his butler begged him not to break them. The servant was afraid that divine wrath might fall upon them. She keeps thinking. Trying to say something, the princess ends up making a normal baby sound. A butler asks Larima if she heard that the guardian deity's egg in the northern forest hatched, and on the same day, the princess was born. Larima asks where the hell he heard that. This also sparked Mabel's interest. The man explains that the guardian deity was born from an egg and looked like a cat with golden fur. Larima replies that it's nothing more than another ridiculous rumor someone made up. The servant says she could ask anyone if she doesn't believe him, explaining that everyone was in a frenzy over it. The woman retorts, questioning how a cat could have golden fur and hatch from an egg, asking how he planned to survive in such a cruel world being that naive. He pleads one last time, saying it's true. Upon hearing this, all Mabel could think of was how the whole conversation reminded her of eating boiled eggs in her past life. But despite that, a guardian deity sounded fascinating. However, from Larima's response, it seemed like a completely baseless rumor. The girl always found it fun to hear Larima and Ravi argue, thinking maybe they liked each other and would end up dating someday. Mabel stretches her arms up as if she were stretching. She had been training often so she could develop faster. Whenever people weren't paying attention to her, the girl practiced moving her body. That way, she had started moving her body little by little. Mabel thinks that thanks to her efforts, she could already move her fingers. Now she could even grab a toy with her hands. She wondered if she should try something more difficult today. The princess thought, determined, that she must be able to do it before being able to roll around on her own. So she tried lifting her own head, which is very difficult for a baby. Straining so hard she began trembling, she gave it her all but ended up failing. Trying again, Mabel feels sad when she realizes she can't do it. She thinks she'll never grow at this rate. Flailing, the girl points out that she can't walk. She can't talk. Not even kicking her legs in frustration was possible since she still had little control over her body. While she sighed, her brother opens the door and walks in. All dirty and covered in leaves, Oscar comments with a smile that the princess isn't asleep today. Oscar walks toward her and the maid notices. Leaning against the crib, the boy looks at Mabel, but the nanny says he can't touch the princess with such dirty hands. He replies that it's okay and asks if he can use the room's bathroom to wash his hands. The woman comments that even so, what if the emperor caught him sneaking in like that? Still thinking, she believes that despite everything, the emperor already knows Oscar visits Mabel from time to time and is just pretending not to know. She looks at Mabel. The baby seemed to be exerting herself a lot. The woman places a hand on her forehead and realizes she's sweating, wondering if the girl might be sick. But in truth, Mabel had just exerted herself too much and was completely fine. She calls out to Larima, asking her to fetch a doctor as quickly as possible because the princess was sweating more than she should. Larima agrees and rushes out as fast as she can. The girl fails to warn that she's fine. After all, she's still a baby Oscar who had just come out of the bathroom, asks Madame Ruffet what happened. Ruffet says to wait a moment as they need to call the doctor. Worried, he approaches Oscar, begs for Mabel to be okay. Mabel just makes an ordinary baby sound in response. Oscar says her voice sounds weak, thinking she might really be unwell. The princess thinks they can do whatever they want since they don't understand her anyway. But just as she was about to doze off again, Oscar and Rufy interrupt her, asking her to stay awake and hold on a little longer. Annoyed, Mabel thinks that every day is a struggle where no one understands her, and that she's going to end up dying of embarrassment. Meanwhile, the emperor was rushing up the stairs. Mabel heard whispers saying the doctor had already arrived, and that it was best to let him examine her as soon as possible. Someone suddenly throws the door open. Making a loud noise, Rufy and Oscar are startled, but the one who opened the door wasn't the doctor. It was the emperor, calling out for Mabel. Worried, he approaches and places his hand near her head, feeling sorry that the defenseless baby was sweating so much. Opening her eyes, Mabel tries to understand what was happening. With red eyes, the emperor looks extremely worried. The man asks where the doctor is. Mabel thinks all of this feels strange. She doesn't understand why he looked at her like that. It was as if he were terrified at the possibility that she might be sick. After all the commotion, the doctor tells the emperor that the princess is actually very healthy, and that the excessive sweating was probably just a momentary heat wave without any danger. Mabel is happy that at least someone understood what she was trying to do, and that she just sweated a lot from moving with such effort. Nothing more. The emperor questions why she had such a sudden heat spike since the palace's temperature is regulated with magical assistance. The doctor says there's no way to determine the cause, but since the princess isn't sweating like that anymore, she's probably fine. Picking Mabel up, the emperor says he's very happy to hear that everyone in the room looked happy and relieved. In his arms, she couldn't help but find all of this very strange. She always felt uncomfortable in his arms, but now she was feeling very comfortable. Even if it was just for a brief moment, her emotions began to shift. 10 minutes earlier, in the meeting room, someone reported that 10 people were injured while transporting a prisoner. The emperor received the news with a clenched fist, irritated, sighing. Someone said they managed to capture him alive, but bringing him to the empire hadn't been easy. Another agreed, saying it was an almost unbelievable feat. After all, they had captured the demon of Devlin. This demon had been a major headache for the Ermino Empire, as he came directly from their greatest enemy, Devlin. This man wore nothing but black clothing from head to toe, no armor or any proper protection, and had started a one-sided massacre during the conflicts. He was a killing machine, and his deeds and carnage earned him the title of the Demon of Devlin. His movements were so fast it was impossible to determine his size or identity. But in the war that occurred at the border a few months ago, when Devlin's forces invaded, the demon ceased all activity, allowing Ermino to capture him. However, to everyone's surprise, when they removed the demon's hood, they realized he was merely a child. The emperor asks where the prisoner is now. Someone states that his men managed to cross the border with the prisoner, but he was still out of control, so his arrival would take a while. The emperor finds the out-of-control part intriguing and asks what they meant by that. The advisors explain that there are good reasons why he was called a demon. The butler approaches and gets close to the monarch. The emperor ends the meeting by saying they'll see when the prisoner arrives and orders the men to keep watch so they don't lose him. The butler whispers something in his ear. Shocked by the news, the emperor slams the table and asks how Mabel could be sick. He then stands up and says he's going to see her immediately. After his departure, the nobles present say he was probably referring to the princess who was born just under a year ago, and that it's thanks to her the emperor has been so calm lately. They say the child had the same cherry blossom-colored hair as her mother. May she rest in peace, but inherited her father's blue eyes. Another man says he heard she's a very sweet and incredibly cute child. A noble asks if the emperor didn't just say the princess was sick, and everyone is shocked. One man says that's very serious. In the past, the princess held a very special place in the emperor's heart. And after her death, the princess is the only person who can keep the emperor from returning to the bloodthirsty man he once was. Everyone believed Mabel was the empire's only hope. The maids are shocked by the amount of medicine and supplies they received from the nobles after hearing the princess might be sick. Everyone thought she should grow up strong and healthy and keep the emperor's wrath under control. Meanwhile, little Mabel slept peacefully and thought there was never a dull moment in this palace. There was all that commotion the other day just because they noticed she was all sweaty. Rufy asks if Larima could pack the rest of the items and asks Ravi to go to the other room and bring the baby stroller approaching. Oscar says they're going to have lots of fun today. But the princess doesn't seem very excited and even tries to say no, but it just comes out as a regular baby sound. She was dressed with a hat and several winter clothes and even had a stroller unnecessarily decorated to carry her around. All this caution was because today would be the first time she'd leave her room. But Mabel didn't even want to go out. She would rather everyone just leave her alone. She had even heard rumors that they destroyed imperial heirlooms to make the stroller she was in now. Deep down, she really didn't want to go outside. It felt like too much suffering. The girl thought it would be really stressful, but looking around the palace, she realized it was much bigger than she had imagined, and she was quite impressed. Having been locked in her room the entire time, the princess had grown a little curious about what the palace was like. And now that she was finally outdoors, she realized it wasn't so bad. Larima said Mabel looked very fascinated as she gazed out at the world. Ravi said her eyes were darting all over the place, full of excitement. Mabel wonders who had said that going outside would be bad, taking back everything she said earlier. But in truth, she was starting to feel cold even with all those layers of clothing. The girl then remembers hearing that the palace was magically temperature regulated, and now realized how much of a difference that made Oscar takes off his coat to offer it to her. But before he can, Larima and the other servants do the same. In the end, they put so many layers on the princess to keep her warm that she couldn't even see what was in front of her. She wonders what the point of bringing her outside was if she wasn't going to be able to see anything. The emperor approaches. Recognizing that they brought her outside, Mabel wonders what he was doing here. He stares at her for a second, then lifts her from under all the blankets. Holding her in his arms, the emperor wishes her a wonderful time and places her back in the stroller. He lays his coat over her and leaves all the other clothes on the ground. One of the maids asks if that wasn't His Majesty's robe made of magical fabric. Someone else says it was rare and precious fabric and didn't expect he'd lend something like that to the princess. Mabel wonders if that counts as lending. He basically just threw it on her. But in the end, the girl thinks it's really warm now. In the northern forest of the Ermino Empire, the butlers, Oscar and Mabel, were sitting near a lake where it felt much warmer. Oscar asks her what she thinks of the world outside looking at the sky. She thinks it's very blue. The princess had never seen such a clear sky before coming to this world. The sky she had seen in her past life was dark, with hardly any stars. Strangely, those memories of her previous life felt very old, even though it hadn't been that long since she was reincarnated. But Mabel still couldn't forget that day. Someone comments that the baby seemed to be getting sleepy. She tries to say no, but can't. She was just remembering, not trying to sleep. Oscar says she can take a little nap if she wants. Hugging her, her brother asks if she's cold. Mabel wonders why he likes her so much. She remembers that morning. Opening the door, Oscar arrived and the maid asked if it wasn't time for his daily training. He replied that he heard Mabel would be going out today, so he finished early. Rufy asks if that's why he was so sweaty. Oscar adds that it was the first time Mabel would see the world, and he wanted to be by her side. After all, he's her older brother and should be there for her. Mabel thinks she had never considered either him or the Emperor as her real family, and maybe the reason for that was because she had no expectations since being reborn. After everything she went through, she really didn't know how to act around these people. But whether she liked it or not, she was born into this family, and nothing that had happened before was their fault. None of her traumas were anyone's fault here. And knowing that, the princess didn't feel comfortable just ignoring them. Ravi, the butler, was throwing away sharp or dangerous stones nearby when he was startled by a figure he saw ahead. Everyone turned to look and realized it was a guardian deity. Mabel is amazed. This was the first time she had seen a guardian deity. What Ravi said wasn't just a rumor. He had mentioned that deities looked like cats, but that didn't exist in Mabel's previous world. And because of that, she was very curious to see one up close. Larima tells Ravi not to mess with her, while Mabel waved her arms trying to get attention to go see it along with the maid. Ravi insists he's telling the truth and calls her over to see it. Larima calls Oscar to go take a look together and he agrees. But to Mabel's disappointment, he hands her over to Rufei, and she is outraged at being left behind. Rufei, noticing the baby's restlessness, asks if the princess would like to go with Oscar to take a look. She waved her tiny baby arms toward him as if begging to go along. In her mind, the princess simply let curiosity take over. However, Oscar just says he won't be long and will be right back, without taking his sister, who is clearly annoyed. She then lets out a small cry, sounding almost like she said, "cat." Right after, her breathing becomes a little heavy from the effort of yelling so loudly. Everyone around falls silent, shocked by what they just heard. Meanwhile, Mabel wonders what happened that made everyone freeze. Oscar remembers having asked Rufei how long it would take for Mabel to start talking, and the nanny had replied that it would take at least 2 years before she could speak clearly. He can't believe that his baby sister, who hasn't even turned one, might have really said her first word, and that it was cat. The others respond uncertainly, but agree that it really did sound like she said cat. She just thought none of that mattered. She only wanted to be taken along and starts repeating the word cat as best as a baby could. Ravi says she's really trying to say cat, and Larima says she heard it too. Mabel thinks that's because she really was trying to say it. In her mind, they were not going to see the Guardian without her. Rufei freezes, stunned, while Mabel thinks everyone is acting strangely, wondering what the problem is. Someone says she's only 2 months old, so she shouldn't be repeating words yet. Mabel is shocked, realizing it was a mistake to try saying cat to get to go along. It was far too early for that. And she doesn't understand why she's acting this way, so much more impulsively than usual. Even though physically she's a baby, mentally she's far from one. After all, the person inside this body is Gyul Yoon, an adult. She then asks herself, why am I acting like this, so impulsively? Is it because my body isn't fully developed yet? Mabel grows concerned, realizing she started repeating words too early, even though she shouldn't be able to speak yet, and fears this will draw even more unwanted attention. Larima, enchanted, declares it's obvious she could do this. The princess is clearly a genius. She says all this while hugging Mabel a little too tightly. Mabel tries to say she can't breathe, but only lets out a tiny squirm Larima doesn't understand, and asks her to repeat it, thinking the baby had said another word. Sadly, Oscar reflects that he can't believe her first word was something like cat, not brother or Oscar. He felt like he had lost to a feline. Mabel realizes the reason he's upset is exactly because of the word she said. Stretching out her arms to comfort her brother, still not believing that was what upset him. The boy tries to understand what she wants. Rufei asks why he doesn't give the princess a hug. Oscar doesn't understand at first, asking if Rufei is talking to him. Before being reborn, the protagonist had never asked anyone for a hug. She didn't particularly want to be hugged, but seeing him so disappointed over something so trivial made her feel bad. Larima hands her into her brother's arms. As he hugs her, he laughs and says his sister finally asked to hug him first. Annoyed, she repeats, cat again, and mentally asks if he's satisfied now, begging him to take her to the forest with everyone. Mabel thinks they can revisit this whole talking thing later. Right now, she just wants to see the guardian deity said to have been born the same day as her. She repeats cat one more time, pretending it's the only word she knows. Oscar says all right. They'll go now. Smiling, Mabel thinks that now people won't call her a genius anymore. While venturing through the forest, someone says it's quiet and they can't see anything. Larima says Ravi must have been lying to them. But even as she's flustered, the servant insists he's telling the truth. Rufei asks them to calm down. Oscar says he thinks Ravi played a prank on them and that they're heading back. Meanwhile, Mabel is clearly disappointed since she really wanted to see the creature. At that moment, something shimmered between the trees. Excited, Mabel tries to move and says, cat, so the others will notice she saw something in the bushes. Oscar looks to the side and then they see it. A tiny, very cute creature all in gold with a small horn on its forehead. There was the guardian deity. Everyone was speechless. It wasn't just that it was golden. It looked as if it were made of actual gold. The guardian then approached and someone commented that it was getting closer. Mabel finally realized that she had truly been born into a different world. The cat came near, circling close to the princess. A bit of its fur brushed against Mabel's nose and she sneezed, accidentally pushing the cat away. Upset? She thought she would have liked to get a better look at it. Madame Ruffet stated that the princess had spent too much time outside and was already sneezing, saying it would be best if they returned to the palace. Everyone agreed. She added that Larima and Ravi, for acting like fools earlier, would clean up everything before they returned to the palace. The woman grumbled while Oscar said he wanted to play with Mabel. Seeing the happiness and anticipation in Oscar's eyes, Mabel wondered if she really should have asked for a hug earlier. Still, she finally got to see the so-called guardian deity, and it was refreshing to witness something beyond the walls of her room. It might actually be nice to go out from time to time. Oscar asked the nanny if his sister had caught a cold. She replied that it was possible, but she seemed fine for now. The boy looked a bit worried, thinking they had stayed outside for too long. Covered once again by her father's coat, the girl wondered what was going on with him when she noticed his expression. But then she noticed the change in Oscar's face, as if he had seen something terrifying, and followed his gaze to see a woman with green eyes, tall, and an impeccable posture that gave off an aura of, "Don't come near." Rufy called her Duchess Donovan. Oscar seemed frightened and clutched his nanny's skirt. Mabel recalled hearing that name a few times. It was Pacifica Donovan, Duchess of her own house, and Oscar's mother. It turned out the emperor had married twice. His first wife was Pacifica, but immediately after Oscar's birth, they divorced. After that, Pacifica overcame all her opposition to become a duchess. Then the emperor's second marriage was to Siana Gardenia, Mabel's mother. The two had fallen in love and married, but unfortunately, she passed away shortly after giving birth to Mabel. Just over a month had passed since her death. Trying to calm himself, Oscar said his mother was scary. Mabel noticed that Oscar never flinched even in front of the emperor, but he seemed to tremble in fear before this woman. That put her on alert and made her feel afraid too. After all, she was the result of the subsequent marriage of that woman's ex-husband, and her existence was probably irritating to her. Oscar began pulling the baby stroller away from the Duchess, and Rufy called out to him. Meanwhile, Mabel was certain that woman must hate her. It was best to get away from her as quickly as possible. A little while later, Oscar and Mabel both sighed in relief, scared but happy they had gotten away. Then the princess noticed some nearby sounds. It seemed like a crowd was gathering close by. Looking at Rufy and Oscar, they both appeared tense. She wondered what was going on. Looking out of the stroller, she saw several knights frozen in place and questioned what the hell was happening. Suddenly, several chains tore through the area, and at the center of it all was just a single dark-haired child. Mabel realized that the reason the knights weren't moving was because of that one small child. The soldier warned the others not to let their guard down. Amid the conflict, they tried to push through the boys' defenses but were repelled with a counterattack. A voice asked if everyone was all right while Mabel grew frightened. Amid all the chaos, the boy's gaze met hers. His blood-red eyes stared into her crystal blue ones. And in that moment, with their eyes locked, it was as if they were the only two people in the world, as if nothing else existed. She wondered what that strange feeling was. Oscar said it was too dangerous here, and they should go back to the castle. The maid agreed and quickly grabbed Mabel's stroller. They moved away from the fight. The boy noticed they had left and seemed to begin falling. A guard said this was their chance. As Mabel tried to understand what was happening, another guard shouted to capture him. She simply couldn't grasp what had just occurred. But looking at Oscar's dark expression, she knew the situation was serious. Inside the palace, a butler asked what the man had said. The noble then reported that the demon of Devlin had caused a disturbance. The boy had managed to escape from the underground prison and had advanced all the way to the castle. But when he reached the center of the palace, he began using all his strength to resist capture. The man reflected that although the worst had been avoided, he didn't understand why Princess Mabel had to be there during her first outing. He then thought that even though nothing had happened, he didn't know how the emperor would react. Someone mentioned that the demon had lost consciousness during the confrontation. He was shocked, wondering how that had happened. Someone replied that they didn't know the exact moment, but that he had probably used up all his power, and on the way to the palace had run out of strength. The man agreed. As he approached the meeting room, the servant grabbed the doorknob and opened the door. Seeing the emperor at his desk, he calmly thought that he was just doing his job. The emperor looked at the man and asked what had happened to interrupt him. The butler hesitated, pondering for a second how he would report the incident involving Princess Mabel. He said he had a report concerning the princess. Now serious, the emperor asked what it was. In his mind, he knew something like this would happen, and that he didn't need to be stared at so intensely. He began explaining that during the process of moving the demon of Devlin to the underground prison, the prisoner ended up spotting the princess from very, very far away. Nervously, the man continued, saying that they were at the opposite end of the courtyard and that absolutely no harm had come to her. Taking his teacup, the emperor asked if that was all. The man felt relieved at the calm reaction, but then added excitedly that Mabel also saw the guardian deity and said the word cat. The teacup shattered in the emperor's irritated hands. The man felt sad, as the piece was very expensive, imagining the cost to the kingdom. The emperor called his name, Gustav. With a voice radiating negative energy, Gustav tried to repeat the part about the demon, but the emperor interrupted him, demanding confirmation about the princess's word. He repeated, explaining that she said, cat. While Gustav mentally pleaded for the emperor's energy not to destroy more objects, something broke in the background. He hoped desperately it wasn't more historical porcelain. To his despair, it was a teapot that had been an heirloom of more than 1,000 years. Worse yet, it had been a gift to the empire. The emperor said this was a disgrace. Frightened, Gustav wondered what was going on. The emperor stood up and said he was going to see Mabel now. Gustav couldn't understand, wondering why the sovereign was more disturbed by his daughter's first word than by the escape of a dangerous prisoner. The emperor called him, and he agreed. Gustav thought, what was the harm in not hearing it, believing they had much work to do? He laughed. The man then thought that if he ever said that to His Majesty, he would never set foot in the empire again. But even so, he wished the emperor would dedicate more to his duties. Mabel thought it was very hot. Rufy asked Larima to close the curtains. Meanwhile, Mabel felt hotter and hotter. Because she had sneezed outside, everyone was taking precautions to raise the temperature, which made the room extremely uncomfortable. She thought that if she made a sound now, at most they'd think she was hungry or something. So she decided to just stay there. Still, Mabel remembered the boy from earlier. The red-eyed youth, she had felt a strange sensation when their eyes met. It was bothering her. The emperor arrived in the room. He said he was just stopping by, then asked if Mabel had enjoyed the outing. The girl wondered mentally why he was here, since they had seen each other just a few hours earlier. He said Mabel seemed a bit heavier now, and the nanny replied that it was because she had just eaten. The emperor showed concern upon noticing she was sweating, and the nanny explained that, fearing the princess would catch a cold, she covered her with the clothes he had given earlier and closed the curtains. He looked at Mabel in his arms and said she had a toy he didn't recognize, adding that he hoped they had tested them all for poison. Rufy was shocked by the statement. He continued, explaining that they must avoid even the slightest possibility of danger to her, and the nanny agreed. Mabel wondered why he was barging in out of nowhere and bothering the servants, finding all of it very annoying. She thought about how to help her nanny a little. The princess then said the word cat while tugging on her father's clothes. For a second, he didn't understand, and then, surprised, he affirmed that what Gustav had told him was true. The girl began repeating the word cat and thought that she was just a normal baby who now only knew how to say that word. Playing with Mabel, her father asks if she liked cats that much. She thinks that honestly, it was whatever they could complain all they wanted. She would keep pretending that was the only word she could say. The emperor says that apparently the cat she saw pleased her, but he was still a little disappointed that her first word wasn't father. Mabel thinks he had the exact same reaction as her brother. With a terrifying look, the emperor says that if she really loved that cat so much, he would grant her the northern forest where the cat lived. He asks if Gustav heard what he had just said, and the man agrees. Meanwhile, Mabel was confused and nervous. The emperor continued, telling him to transfer the northern forest into her name. While writing, Gustav said he heard it very clearly and was already carrying out the order. Mabel just wanted to ask them to wait a minute. She thought this didn't feel right. It made no sense. He was giving her a forest just because she liked the cat that lived in it. This was absurd. Besides that, he was giving an entire forest to his daughter who was only 2 months old. That was absolutely senseless, and the emperor obviously couldn't be serious. Mabel began to make a face, and he commented that his daughter didn't seem too happy with her present. The emperor asked Gustav for his opinion. She thought that, finally, someone would say how bad of an idea this was. Gustav says that the princess wasn't impressed because the northern forest grounds weren't as well maintained as the palace gardens and other imperial areas. Mabel still didn't understand anything, and the emperor says he made a good point. The girl sighed, realizing they weren't even close, and questioned what the hell they were thinking, assuming a baby could judge landscape maintenance. The emperor asks Gustav to start writing again, and then continues by saying that if that's the case, he would grant her the entire Fonze castle. While smiling and watching her expression, he noticed his daughter looked calmer and said not to worry. The northern forest still belonged to them. Even with a calm expression, Mabel thought he could do whatever he wanted. She had completely given up trying to reason with them. Some time passed, and now Princess Mabel was 3 months old. And today the Empire was receiving some special visitors. The castle doors opened. From them entered several men in white robes. They were priests from the Holy Empire of Abelardo, regarded as God's agents. The man in front greeted the Emperor formally. Despite this, the Emperor wore an extremely irritated expression. The Emperor thought these important priests had finally decided to show up, even though he had torn up all the letters they sent. He didn't expect to have to face these persistent priests in person so soon. The priest said that His Majesty seemed surprised by the sudden visit. Annoyed, the Emperor agreed, saying he heard they were in his nation for the purpose of studying ancient sacred languages and wished them luck in their studies and a safe return. He thought the less time they spent here, the better. The priest thanked him for his consideration and said they would do their best to produce fruitful results for the future of Abelardo and Erminio. As the Emperor was about to say something, the priest interrupted him. The man then said that before they took their leave, there was something they wanted to discuss regarding the princess, calling her Mabel Winter Gardenia Erminio. With a cold stare, the Emperor said he had made a small mistake, pointing out that her name did not include the surname Winter. While listening to their conversation, Gustav recalled that this name was the sacred title given to the princess by the oracle's prophecy, and that at the time of Mabel's birth, the Holy Empire had announced that the heavens had granted her another name, Winter. But His Majesty, on the other hand, stated that he did not recognize Abelardo's oracle, asking how they could be so sure it referred to Mabel. The oracle had said that at the end of the East, the seed of resurrection had been planted. Irritated and gripping his chair, he thought that the fact Erminio was located at the eastern tip of the continent and that a lightning bolt struck at the exact moment of her birth made everything more difficult. He wondered if he could really call all of this a coincidence. Scratching his chin, the priest said he had expected him to say that the Emperor was so irritated he was nearly breaking the armrest of his throne, while at the same time Gustav was mentally begging the Emperor to hold back and not kill the priest. The Emperor's supporters grew a bit anxious, wondering whether he would manage to control his temper or revert back to how he used to be, before he got married. The Emperor then said that Mabel was only 3 months old and just a baby. He asks if the priests were expecting him to send such a small and fragile being to Abelardo just because of a minor prophecy. Placing his hand on his robe, the priest said he had something the Holy Emperor had asked him to deliver. Taking out a box, he explained that the Emperor of Abelardo had said he would recognize it. The Emperor wondered what justification they could possibly have to demand that his daughter be taken from the Empire. In the end, he recognized it as the pendant of the former Emperor. It turns out that when the previous Emperor was engaged in a succession war to ascend the throne, he received support from the Holy Empire of Abelardo. And as a sign of gratitude, he had 2 identical pendants made and sent one to the Holy Empire. He says that apparently the Holy Empire now wanted him to pay the debt of the previous Emperor, who had long since passed, with his daughter, asking how exactly he was supposed to feel about that. The priest tries to say that was not their intention, but the Emperor snaps back, saying it seemed like the Holy Empire was asking him to sell his own daughter, asking if he was mistaken. The man then says that he knows these are irrational requests and understands that he cannot take the princess right now, but affirms that His Holiness only wants to protect the person the oracle foretold and keep her safe. The Emperor thought the priest would be more insistent. He thought he really hated those sneaky bastards from Abelardo, and that one could never know what they were plotting. The priest says that since the Emperor seems so firmly determined to refuse, he would at least like to ask a favor. He asks what that would be. The man then requests an audience with the princess. At first, the Emperor thought he had been completely blunt, and that he would love nothing more in the world than to refuse. But now that the agreement of the former Emperor was at stake, he had no choice but to yield a little. He then says fine, but with one condition. Happy, the priest asks what it is. The Emperor says he will be in the room when the meeting takes place. Additionally, they are to stay at least 18 meters away at all times and are forbidden from touching her. He continued, saying they may not use any enchantment or divine power. At this point, all the priests in the back were pale. The Emperor concludes by explaining that the second Mabel cries, they are to leave. The priest wondered what the hell all this was, thinking how someone could be so overprotective. Smiling, the Emperor thought that if the priest posed even the slightest threat to his daughter, he would be there to put an end to it immediately. In the princess's room, Mabel had her eyes half closed as she enjoyed her peaceful life. She wondered where Ravi might have gone while Rufy knitted. The girl also thought that Larima and Rufy seemed worried, then wondered if she should practice rolling over again in secret. They had laid her on her side, which would make it easier. Mabel pleaded to herself to succeed in rolling today. Making an effort, she tried, but her head was too heavy for it. Forcing her to give up, the protagonist didn't want to sweat and cause the same fuss as last time. She thought about practicing again at night when no one was watching. Oscar appeared and asked if she was waiting for him. Mabel thought she wouldn't waste her dignity answering that. Even though 3 months had passed, Oscar still visited her whenever he had time. She thought her brother was a bit strange. Mabel believed that sooner or later his charm would wear off and he would stop coming. Sitting beside the crib, he opened a book and said he was going to read aloud so she could listen. She thought Oscar could read all he wanted. She was bored anyway. Wondering what the book might be, Mabel thought it might be some kind of children's fairy tale. Oscar cleared his throat. He then read the book's title, The Evils of Bordeauxism, according to Algor Chekhov. The girl tensed her entire body reflexively in shock. What the hell was he planning to read to a 3-month-old baby? Oscar continued, explaining the content of the book. Mabel was even more confused. He was only supposed to be 6 years old. So why was he reading something that sounded more like academic literature than anything else? As the boy read, Mabel began to get irritated and thought this wasn't good for babies like her. She then spat out her pacifier, startling Oscar. He asked if his sister didn't like it, saying he would go find something she might find more interesting. Mabel thought no 3-month-old baby would enjoy a book with that title. Smiling, Oscar said he would go find a better book right away. The princess sincerely hoped so. She was in disbelief that a child, even a prince, could read something like that. He states that having such an early education is a problem. Some sounds of conversation are heard behind the door. Oscar turns around. Mabel reflexively says the word cat. Embarrassed, she realizes she had picked up the habit of saying it while pretending it was the only word she could say. She then wonders what all the commotion outside is about. Usually only the Emperor or someone related would appear. Oscar and Rufy were getting anxious too. The door opens, revealing the Emperor with the priest behind him. Rufy greets him. The priests approach Mabel, watch them with alert eyes, and the priest leading the expedition did the same in return. So she wondered what was going on, because suddenly she started to feel nauseous. Coming even closer, the man states that this was the princess. Mabel wonders who these people are. While the man spoke, Mabel noticed that the closer he got, the more nauseous she felt. Holding him back, the Emperor asked him to stop right there, reminding him of the conditions they had agreed upon. Stating that he hadn't forgotten, the priest said he simply couldn't help it in the presence of what the oracle had foretold. The Emperor replies that she wasn't his prophecy. The man says that since she had not yet awakened, the princess's divine powers were simply infinite. Someone else agreed with what he said. Mabel was confused, barely able to follow the conversation. She knew they were definitely talking about her, but she had no idea what they meant with all those terms. And now she was feeling more nauseous with every passing second. And all of that sensation was emanating from that man. Oscar watched her closely, not understanding her reactions. Meanwhile, she wondered if this was the divine power he had mentioned earlier. Mabel tried to say something, but Oscar stepped forward and said she didn't need to be afraid, explaining that they were just priests from the Holy Empire. She tried to remember why she had heard that name so many times and what they could possibly want from seeing her. The Emperor says that the princess was clearly uncomfortable and that they were leaving. With a sinister smile, the priest agrees, bowing. He also says that he heard Erminot had captured the demon of Devlin. The Emperor says yes, adding that it happened about a month ago. The priest states that he heard he was a skilled warrior who could manipulate his aura even without an artifact, and asks if there were any casualties. The Emperor says there were some injuries and that the young man was powerful enough to destroy some of the limiters they had, which made it difficult to contain him. Mabel listened to the conversation attentively. Although she thought Demon of Devlin was a ridiculous name based on what the Emperor was saying, he must have been very strong. The priest comments that Devlin's movement was currently very alarming, to the point that they intended to expand into the Holy Empire. The emperor was surprised by the news. The priest replied that they had no idea what Devlin was thinking by doing that. The emperor became a bit thoughtful. The priest finally warns that if their intention was to recover the hostage, their actions could affect Hermano, and so he should be careful and stay alert. After that, he says they are leaving. Mabel still looked at the man with a slightly queasy expression. The priest bows and says he hopes to see Princess Mabel again, adding the surname Winter to her name. Sighing, the girl thinks that now that the people had left the room, the nausea had passed. But she still found it all very strange, because she hadn't seen hostility on the man's face. Wondering then why she had felt such a bad sensation. As the church members left, Rufy and the Emperor watched. Holding Mabel's hand, Oscar says the priest from Abelardo gave up more easily than he expected. Looking to the side, thoughtful, the Emperor agrees, but says that it doesn't matter. This won't be the end of the matter. Abelardo will still try something. Someone asked why he thought they mentioned the Devlin Empire. He explains that he needed to analyze that too. While Oscar played with her hands, Mabel thought it sounded like Abelardo had some issue with her, and the Emperor was trying to keep them at a distance. Wondering finally what kind of business they could possibly have with a baby. Strangely remembering that they had called her by a different name, adding the surname Winter Smiling, Oscar says it's okay, and that she doesn't need to worry or know about any of it. Curious, the girl thinks it's not fair to be left out. As night fell, Ravi said the princess was sleeping soundly, and Rufy replied that they should leave the room quietly so as not to wake her. He agrees. As soon as they left the room, Mabel starts opening her eyes, thinking they were already gone. Finally alone, she thinks it's the only moment in the day when she can let loose. Up until a month ago, her nanny used to sleep in the same room. But probably because she didn't cry like the other babies, now she could sleep in a separate room at night. Waving her arms cheerfully, Mabel says it's the perfect time to practice rolling over. Clenching her fists with determination, she starts to push herself. But unfortunately, she realizes she's not making any progress with it, yet she's very eager to start walking as soon as possible. She knows how hard it will be. After all, she's only 3 months old. However, the overwhelming love from her father and brother is starting to make her uncomfortable, and neither of them probably knows what she's thinking. The girl thinks that if they knew, neither the Emperor nor Oscar would want to be family with someone like her. In the end, it feels like she's lying to everyone. And because of that, Mabel thinks she needs to grow up as fast as possible and leave this place. Then the baby hears a sound. Wondering what it is, she considers for a second that it might be her nanny. But the sound wasn't coming from the front room. The wind made her realize the window was open, but that didn't make sense. Rufy, her nanny, always made sure to check them all. She realized something was wrong. Mabel then heard the sound of footsteps. Someone was heading in her direction. Anxiously, she realized the person was getting closer with each step. Unable even to roll over to see who it was, she could only imagine and feel nervous. Since the person came through the window, it couldn't be Oscar or the Emperor. She wondered what they wanted, coming into a baby's room while everyone was asleep. There could be no good intentions. As the person got closer, she began to feel the same sensation she had earlier, like the moment with the priests. She wondered if it could be the same man from before. Looking up, she saw that she was right. The priest says that apparently she was awake. In the end, it really was the man from earlier. He says he's there to escort her. The princess thinks that speaking respectfully while kidnapping someone doesn't help her feel any more comfortable. Mabel wonders if the priest knew that she wasn't actually a baby in her mind. Ignoring that and focusing on her priorities, the girl tries to figure out a way to get help to stop the man. She then covers her eyes and begins to make a loud noise. The man hesitates for a second. Nervously, he tries to calm her down. The princess continues, thinking that this way he'll probably get caught. Desperate, he looks around and tries somehow to make her stop crying. The more he tried, the more Mabel deliberately cried louder. The door opens. The Emperor approaches the room. Still unsuccessfully, the priest tries to silence her. The man says he'll at least grab her and leave since they didn't have much time. Reaching out his hand, he tries to pick her up. Mabel kicks and struggles, thinking he should just give up and leave. But despite all her efforts, there was nothing she could do. After all, she was just a baby. The girl could only think she didn't want to be kidnapped, begging her body to move. Trying with all her strength, she finally manages to turn over. Baby flip. The priest is shocked. And practically forgetting the situation, she's happy for finally being able to move voluntarily. Realizing she managed to roll over, she was overwhelmed with the feeling of finally being able to do it. She had finally rolled over. Opening the door and shouting for her, the Emperor appeared. Irritated, he sees the priest in the room. Mabel thinks she's saved. There's no way she'd be kidnapped right in front of the Emperor. Coldly, he says the man's name, Montague. And approaching, the Emperor asks what he had done to his daughter. The priest says he hadn't touched a single hair on her head. The Emperor then asks why she was turned over on her stomach. Mabel then thinks, confused, not knowing how he could possibly explain that. The priest then says that she had rolled over by herself. Irritated, drawing his sword from its sheath, the Emperor asks what that was. Kneeling, the priest says it's true and swears in the name of Hades. Mabel thinks that was the sound of the Emperor drawing his sword and wonders if he would really kill that man. The girl thinks that even though he had tried to kidnap her, he really hadn't touched her or done her any harm. She thinks she would feel terrible if she let the priest die like that, and that she had to help somehow. First, she had to try to roll over again. As the priest tried to explain everything, Mabel was basically trembling and turning in bed, failing in her attempt to move again. Irritated, the Emperor held the blade close to his neck and said that this was exactly the reason. Continuing, the Emperor stated that because of him, he hadn't seen Mabel roll over for the first time. Mabel and the man both wondered if he was actually being serious. Several people were present. One of the attendants said he was shocked, after all. He checked the barrier every day, wondering how they had the chance to tamper with it. Another man responded that it was exactly that. It was such a fine modification that they hadn't even noticed. They went on saying that the barrier was one thing, but a priest getting past the guards was another matter entirely. They doubted the knights would escape the Emperor's wrath. In his room, the Emperor was thinking. Mabel's position was unique. She was second in line to the throne, and also the sole successor to the Marchioness Gardania. Since the Marchioness Gardania had many enemies, he thought her political opponents might want to eliminate Mabel, and that's why he had activated a magical barrier and constantly increased the number of guards. Thus, he didn't expect the priest to get past the defenses so easily. He kept cursing the envoys of Abelardo, and apparently only that man had made a breach in the barrier during that brief audience with Mabel. From the beginning, the plan was to kidnap his daughter. The Emperor wondered if he should have gouged out the priest's eyes. The knights were in front of him, but it was still a complicated situation. He thought that regardless of what the oracle said, Princess Mabel was his only daughter. And even though the kidnapping attempt had failed, he had every reason to be angry. However, the last thing they needed was any diplomatic friction between the Empire and Abelardo. The guards were pushing the responsibility of speaking to the Emperor onto one another, afraid of his reaction. Meanwhile, he was still thinking about having gouged the man's eyes earlier. One of the guards stood up, saying that although the priest was certainly guilty, punishing him for what happened today would be excessive. The Emperor repeated his words, processing them. The man continued, saying he understood the fact the Emperor was furious, but diplomatic relations between the nations were of utmost importance. While he spoke, the man was interrupted by the Emperor, who simply said that Mabel had cried. The guard didn't understand what he meant. The Emperor said she had never cried in her life, but when the priest got close, she became frightened and burst into tears. The soldier thought the rumors were true, and besides that, the Emperor looked deadly serious. There was a rumor that the Emperor favored the princess, giving her a forest, a castle, and all kinds of precious treasures. Many said that he cherished the princess so much he refused to allow even a simple audience with her. While the soldier thought about the rumors, the Emperor was still murmuring to himself that he wished he had torn the priest apart limb by limb. And if Mabel hadn't been there, he probably would have. Everyone present was relieved that Mabel had been there at that moment. The Emperor explained to the soldier that he would take his opposition into account and would let the matter go for now, only asking to have the man imprisoned and to see how Abelardo would react to the news. The Emperor continued, asking the man for his opinion on another matter. At first, he was confused, but then the Emperor said Mabel needed a guard, someone who could watch over her closely and protect her at all times. Turning to the soldiers behind him, he asked if there were any volunteers. Everyone immediately understood. At first glance, it seemed like a cushy job that would spare one from the nightmare of night training, but it was actually a double-edged sword. Any small mistake would lead to massive consequences, for which he would have to answer directly to the Emperor of Erminau. It was far too risky, and everyone knew it. The Emperor asked how it was possible that no one was willing. The door opened and a man raised his hand, saying that he would like to be the princess's personal guard. Another day in the princess's room, Mabel wondered at some point why they had given her a pacifier. Explaining that in such a cruel world, she had realized it was something that gave her the purest happiness. She could do it all day long. While Ravi and Larima said that the princess really loved her pacifier, the girl was thinking that either way, she wanted to know what had happened to the priest. The Emperor had dragged him around, and Mabel wanted to know if anyone knew what had happened. Ravi noted that apparently the princess could roll over now. Larima called him a liar and said she wouldn't believe it unless she saw it with her own eyes. Mabel thinks that those two are definitely very close. Despite always arguing, they were always together. She had heard they had been friends since birth, more like brothers. The princess remembers always wanting a close friendship like that, which made her very jealous of them. And even now, having a brother didn't feel the same. She questioned if she would ever really have something she could call a family. Mabel wondered who she could trust when someone opened the door. A man approached Mabel's crib. The princess appeared to be asleep, but the man's shadow woke her up. He greeted her, but since it was so sudden, it scared her, making her spit out her pacifier far away. The man bent down to pick up the pacifier while Mabel thought he looked like a murderer and wondered who the hell he was. He asked if he had accidentally scared her, saying that despite that, she had a cute expression, which made Mabel irritated. Laughing, he also thought that he couldn't put the pacifier back in her mouth since it had fallen to the ground. The night continued, saying he had apparently made a terrible first impression. Mentally, Mabel agreed, wondering who on earth he thought he was to act so friendly. Rufy came through the door saying that Sir Donovan had arrived very early. Mabel wondered if her nanny knew this man. He greeted her. Meanwhile, Mabel focused on his last name, finding it familiar. The knight said he hadn't seen Rufy in a long time, kissing her hand. Mabel then remembered Donovan was the last name of the former empress and Oscar's mother. The man said Rufy looked even more beautiful than the last time he had seen her. He continued, saying he was happy at the thought of seeing her every day. Laughing, she replied that he was as charming as ever. Rufy revealed that she was relieved to hear that he, the swordsman of the Emperor's Knight Order, would be the princess's bodyguard. Mabel felt a bit alarmed upon hearing that. She thought she really did need someone to protect her, but she questioned how trustworthy someone from the former Empress's family could be. She still felt no one that close to her could be so friendly toward the princess. And there was also the fact that he was openly flirting with her nanny. He might be handsome, but he seemed more like a playboy, and she wanted him far away from them. Donovan said that from the way she was looking at him, Mabel clearly didn't like the idea. The girl mentally agreed. Rufy said there was nothing to be done. After what happened with strangers entering her room and trying to kidnap her last night, it was understandable that she was wary of anyone she wasn't close to. Mabel flailed her arms, and Rufy found it odd that she wanted someone to hold her in such a rare moment. Mabel thought that what happened yesterday wasn't Rufy's fault and wanted to help so she wouldn't feel sad. Rufy said she was such a sweetheart and well-behaved despite everything. Mabel thought that, to be honest, she wasn't well-behaved. But if her nanny said so, she would at least try. Both were smiling. In awe, the knight said that the child in her arms couldn't be the princess. He was sure of it. Rufy asked what he meant, and Mabel thought that made no sense. Letting out a surprised sigh, the knight said she was probably a descendant of angels who had come from the heavens and that the oracle was right. Annoyed, Mabel thought that here came another one with that weird talk. Maybe this was the man who was going to protect her. And she wondered if he was really the best for the job. She thought maybe the Emperor hated her and that's why he sent him here. Mabel shuddered, thinking negatively that anyone in her place would feel the same. However, she didn't know what she would do next and was worried about the future. Someone opened the door. Everyone inside was surprised and heard someone calling Mabel. Oscar tended to act like an adult most of the time, probably due to the lessons he received and all the expectations of being first in line to the throne. However, when he entered the room, for a moment he was acting like a child his own age. Opening the door with a smile, he entered the room without even knocking. Oscar sighed for a moment, realizing that man was there. He hesitated, calling him Uncle. The man saw him and asked why he was there. At this hour of the day, he should be studying the Emperor's disciplines. Serious and adjusting his posture, the boy formally responded that he had finished before coming. Mabel found it strange, wondering if that was really the same boy who had been smiling a second ago, not understanding why he was being so stiff with Oscar. The knight continued, saying that coming here to play right after finishing his tasks was a careless behavior for the heir to the empire, expressing his disappointment and saying he should be more careful with his actions for the sake of the name Ermino. Mabel thought he was speaking in a completely different tone than before, even frightening her a little. Not even the emperor was that strict with Oscar, and she wondered why his uncle would go that far. Despite being the heir to the throne with many responsibilities, he was still a 6-year-old child. He should be allowed to play around sometimes. The man said Oscar should make better use of his time, suggesting it would be more beneficial for him to practice his fencing. Oscar agreed. Rufy hesitated at the scene, but she couldn't interfere. Seeing this, Mabel remembered hearing that she had once been Oscar's nanny as well. The princess thought she didn't have many options since she couldn't speak, but maybe she could do something. Oscar was approaching the door. Taking a deep breath, Mabel wanted to help him. Then she started making a noise. Oscar hesitated and looked back. He saw Mabel about to cry. Rufy was surprised. Mabel rarely did that. Oscar came running. He asked what was wrong, saying everything would be okay. He picked her up in his arms while asking her to stop crying. As he gently patted her back, Mabel thought that maybe Oscar could only truly relax when he was with her. And in that case, she would do her best to ensure his uncle didn't stay near her. She glared at him with irritation. The man approached and asked Oscar to hand her over, saying he was afraid the boy might drop her. Mabel thought they were fine the way they were. She just wanted the man to leave. Oscar tried to argue but couldn't. So the princess tried to push the man away using the only word she was supposed to know. As if trying to intimidate the knight, the girl shouted. Still, she was embarrassed inside, apologizing for only being able to make that sound. But either way, it would work now. The nanny stepped between them and said the princess was probably a bit shy and suggested he stand guard outside the room. Sir Donovan agreed, still trying to understand what just happened. Rufy added that Prince Oscar visited her almost every day, and she'd be upset if he didn't show up like usual. Still making an angry face, Mabel thought it wasn't true, but she could let it slide for now, realizing her nanny sometimes lied. Sighing and patting Oscar's head, the knight told them to enjoy their time with the princess. Nervously, the boy agreed, looking at Mabel, and then the guard left the room. Oscar said everything was okay now, and that he was gone. Mabel thought she knew that. It was basically thanks to her. Smiling, her brother asked if she really asked for him every day. While Rufy laughed, Mabel realized he really was just a child. After all, that was the first thing that came to his mind. Walking through the palace, the man heard someone call the name Lit. Turning around, he saw it was Pacifica, Oscar's mother. The knight asked what it was. Pacifica said she heard he had volunteered to be the princess's guard. As they walked, he replied that no one else had been willing to do it, and his dear sister knew that. He added, explaining that she always knew how he was with children. The woman stopped, telling him not to play dumb. Awkwardly, he replied that since Pacifica was so strict and reserved, one of them had to be the fool sometimes. Turning back, she continued, now asking, since he had met the princess, what was she like? Thoughtful and scratching his chin, the man said she was the most adorable baby he had ever seen. He started to ramble about how tiny her hands were, how chubby her cheeks were, saying the princess might actually be an angel. Pacifica said that made sense, and he replied that there was no need to worry, pointing out she was never good with children anyway. The knight asked if that wasn't exactly why she was so cold with Oscar, pointing out that he was being just as strict as she had asked. Remembering when Oscar was younger, the boy seemed so lonely, separated from his mother and living in the great palace. So he would go play with the boy and spend time with him as his uncle. He also recalled that the Empress took good care of him, even though she wasn't his mother. Lit thought he should pay more attention to him, since he was the brother of his biological mother. But Pacifica was far too relentless. She told that small child not to show even a hint of immaturity, and at some point, she had passed the responsibility of teaching him both academic knowledge and fencing. In the beginning, the man was happy, but Pacifica had emphasized that he should not treat him with special consideration or kindness. He asked if they weren't being too harsh on Oscar, pointing out that he was only 6 years old. The woman said that was enough. Walking away, she explained that this conversation had lasted long enough and asked him to return to his post. The knight found it odd, thinking she would have something more to say. Scratching his head, he thought Pacifica wasn't the type of person to talk to someone without a reason, and her expression while talking about the princess could indicate something. He wondered if the little princess had somehow drawn his sister's ire, saying it was at the very least concerning. He thought that once the princess grew older, she would meet Pacifica more frequently, questioning what might happen. Sighing, he thought that if he treated Mabel the same way he treated Oscar, her feelings would be very hurt. They were both walking in opposite directions, and Lit said he should probably worry about himself first, while thinking that maybe the little princess didn't like him. As Lisandro's anxiety grew, the season changed from spring to summer. Mabel wondered if it was because she was so young or because she remembered everything. To her, time was passing like a snail, extremely slowly. The girl was bored. Mabel thought that maybe if she didn't remember her past life, all this time would have passed in the blink of an eye. She'd obviously done everything she could to entertain herself during these calm and boring days. The princess could now lift her head when lying on her stomach. She had finally mastered the art of rolling over perfectly, and now she could even get back onto her back. However, she hadn't done that all these days, since there were always people around, which would reveal her abnormal developmental speed. Rufy wondered why the princess had been moving so little lately, feeling worried. While eating, Mabel thought she couldn't make the same mistake she had when she spoke too early. Anyway, she could finally eat baby food now. She was finally starting to feel like she was growing and becoming a person, even though they still alternated between baby mush and milk sometimes. The nanny congratulated her for eating everything and wiped her messy mouth. Mabel couldn't wait to start eating adult food since the Imperial family used to serve all kinds of gourmet buffets. Rufy walked with Mabel in her arms, gently patting her to burp. In her past life, she remembered never really being able to eat what she wanted. While others could enjoy that luxury, she was always getting food from cheap convenience stores when she worked there. Mabel stared at the chandelier, bored. She wondered why her memories always went back to those past days. It only made her more depressed. More importantly, Lisandro Donovan was waiting behind the door again. Making a face, she remembered he was Oscar's fencing and academic tutor. Whether or not he was a good teacher, the way he treated Oscar was still fresh in her mind. She also remembered that he was probably the one who made her brother read that ridiculous book about Algor Chekhov. So Mabel would never be on good terms with him. Turning in her crib with an irritated expression, the girl thought that Oscar could only escape a bit from all this stress when he was with her, and that the man outside acted foolishly now, but changed completely when near her brother. The protagonist wanted to make sure to keep him away, so she repeatedly shouted the only word she could say, annoyed. Ravi said he still couldn't get used to it. After all, the princess had never disliked someone so much before. Larima agreed, but added that if it were based on appearance, it would make more sense for her to act like that toward Ravi. They started arguing again. Dazed, Mabel thought this was happening again, wondering if the two had some kind of disease that forced them to fight constantly. Either way, she thought, whatever. Just hoping night would come soon so she could be free to practice crawling. Rufy asked if Mabel was very bored. She continued, saying it was a beautiful day outside with great weather for a picnic by the lake. Mabel thought that was really out of nowhere and unexpected. Rufy said that if they went to the northern forest, they might find the cat she loves so much. In other words, the guardian deity. For the umpteenth time, Mabel said the word cat. Mabel concluded it was because she repeated that word all the time, so Rufy thought she really liked him. The girl then wondered if everyone thought she was extremely obsessed with cats, thinking that in the future, once she could speak, she should explain that it wasn't particularly about the guardian, but rather that she liked cats in general. Mabel realized that until the day she could say that out loud, she wouldn't be able to clear up this little misunderstanding. Rufy said she was moving her eyes a lot, thinking it was excitement about seeing the feline guardian. Ravi and Larima walked side by side. Mabel thought she hadn't realized it while inside the palace, but it was really hot today. Rufy asked if it wasn't much warmer than the last time they were outside. She continued, explaining that it was because of summer. It was hot, but still green and full of life. The nanny adjusted the parasol to keep Mabel from getting too much sun. Mabel thought Rufy hadn't brought her outside just to leave the room, but so she could experience the change in season. The princess found that very kind and, despite the heat, decided to endure it for a bit. Petals floated in the air, and Mabel caught a scent, the fragrance of flowers. Rufy smiled. Picking a flower, she asked Mabel if it wasn't beautiful. Holding it, Mabel mentally agreed, finding the petals very soft. She remembered how in her past life she had never received flowers from anyone, mainly because of how expensive bouquets were. It was something she had only seen on special occasions like school entrances or graduation ceremonies. It made sense to her since no one had gone to her graduation. Mabel recalled seeing other children holding flowers with their parents and taking pictures, but she hadn't had any of that. The girl now held the flower with a strange expression. She thought she needed to stop remembering things like that and turned her head to focus on the present. Mabel told herself she was being silly and just needed to move on. Arriving at the lake, Ravi held Mabel and said maybe they would find the cat. Looking over his shoulder, Mabel noticed someone hiding behind the grass. She saw it was Lisandro, her bodyguard, and wondered if she was being too mean to him. After all, he was protecting the princess from far away, which not only made his job harder but was kind of sad. Reinforcing her resolve, she told herself no. She had to do this so Oscar could have a place to relax, and for that, she had to be strong. Mabel started glaring at Lisandro. Someone said she was giving Sir Donovan a really nasty look, asking why she hated him so much and suggesting they look for the cat. Ravi walked around with her, entering the forest a bit and wondering if they wouldn't see him today. Mabel was surprised, and the golden cat appeared. Ravi said the cat was approaching and must be happy to see her again. Excited, she agreed. Seeing the golden fur, she almost couldn't believe it. Ravi noted the cat seemed a bit bigger than last time. The girl reached out to pet him. The guardian rubbed his head against her hand. She found it incredibly cute. Mabel thought the deity was born the same day as her and wondered if it was just coincidence that they were in the same forest, or if it was something foreseen by Abelardo's oracle. In the end, she couldn't reach any conclusion. She was just too exhausted. It was really hot and she needed shade. Seeing the princess sweat, Ravi gently wiped her forehead and said it was a bit too warm. They should return to the lake. He said it was time to say goodbye to the cat and asked her to say bye-bye. Ravi held her in front of the cat, and the girl wondered if he really expected her to say that. He looked at her with anticipation. The most she managed was a ba-ba while waving her hand. Pleased, he said she did a great job. She wondered why he looked so proud over something so small. It was kind of embarrassing. The cat then stared at them as they walked back toward the lake. Mabel then heard a voice telling her to come back soon. The cat turned and she heard it again. Ravi asked what it was, and Mabel realized she was the only one who could hear that voice. She wondered if it was just the heat and that she might be imagining things. Back by the lake, Ravi continued playing with the princess. While she pointed to places for Ravi to walk, she was secretly manipulating Lisandro to keep following them as part of his duty, making him walk a lot. Since he had to stay with them, Mabel thought this would be a perfect punishment for bullying Oscar. However, the first to break was Ravi. Panting, he said he needed a break and sat on the ground. Then he immediately laid down. She grew curious about what Larima and her nanny were doing. Looking over, she saw they were just chatting as usual. She thought that since they didn't plan to return to the castle anytime soon, this was her chance to sneak away. Mabel began crawling away. She thought she'd finally be able to practice crawling freely, and they had a pretty spacious area there. Rufy turned around and Larima looked confused. She shouted for Ravi not to get distracted and to watch the princess closely. Mabel froze in place. Ravi agreed and the girl sighed. However, shortly after, a tired Ravi fell asleep and Mabel thought he was just a weak young man, ending up like that after just a few strolls around the lake. The protagonist thought he needed more exercise and would use this opportunity to move around. She wouldn't go far. While crawling, she saw something dark emerging from a bush. Curious, she approached, and gradually saw the silhouette of a boy lying down. Her eyes widened as she realized it was the demon of Devlin. He was collapsed and covered in blood, but he seemed to be merely asleep, meaning he was at least still alive. She approached and realized without a doubt, this was the boy she had seen the first time she left the palace. She remembered being very surprised to hear that this small child was the demon of Devlin. She thought he had definitely been captured by the knights that day. So what was he doing unconscious in that place? Mabel considered that the boy might have escaped from prison, but he was covered in blood and wounds. She thought maybe he had been tortured, but since he was just a child, that would be far too cruel. After all, he didn't seem much older than Oscar. Mabel thought she would at least like to clean his blood, but she couldn't do that. At this point, all she could do was crawl slowly and not even speak. Rufy realized what was happening and woke Ravi, warning that the princess had slipped away. The girl hesitated, realizing she had been discovered, and Ravi agreed. She looked around and realized they would likely find the boy's body, and she didn't know what to do in that situation. She grabbed some grass and then had an idea. Mabel would just hide him for now. If they didn't find him, there'd be no problem. Ravi searched for the princess. Meanwhile, she hurried to try to camouflage the boy before the servant arrived and saw everything. The boy woke up only to see a baby throwing leaves in his face. Mabel realized he opened his eyes. Those red eyes made her feel drawn in, as if they were calling her closer. Ravi was getting closer, and her time was running out. The princess thought this wasn't going to work, that it was better to just leave and distract them. She crawled back to where Ravi was. The servant then said she was covered in mud and asked if at least she had fun. She responded with a loud, "Bah." Mabel thought she had done everything she could. So the boy remained on the ground, bloody and covered in leaves. He thought he had had a long dream he couldn't remember well. Always floating in total darkness, and whatever happened in that time, he lost control of his body and killed everyone around him, friend or foe. The boy believed it was like being a weapon born only to kill. But sometimes, when he was floating in that dream without memory, very rarely he came back to his senses. The boy was then in a prison cell. He thought he was locked up with limiters on his powers. Forcing his fist, it started bleeding, and the chain began to crack. A guard noticed the sound. When the guards approached and asked what it was, they were all on the floor the very next second. The demon of Devlin had escaped. Near the castle walls, someone said they couldn't lose him and had to search immediately. Hidden behind a tree, he listened to the distant murmurs, wondering if this was the palace of the Ermino Empire. He knew he had lost control again. And it would happen again against his will. And when he launched attack after attack without mercy, suddenly, his mind felt clean and clear. That was the moment she was in front of him, the moment he saw Mabel's blue eyes. He realized what he was seeing was a baby. Remembering he had been scared for a second, and that's where his memories ended. The boy thought he had probably passed out. Blood was dripping from his hand. The sensation of having a clear mind when it used to be so clouded was something he had never experienced. Wondering what exactly that had been, he realized he had lost a lot of blood, and lying on the ground, he intended to rest for a bit. His wounds were moderate. With a little rest, his powers would take care of him. However, the same baby from before appeared. He had sensed her presence, but thought it might have just been a rabbit. It was small, and there was no reason to kill it. As long as it left him alone, he wouldn't do anything. Mabel stared at him with determination. Meanwhile, he wondered why the little being was still there, perhaps drawn by the smell of blood. That was when Mabel grabbed the leaves around and threw them at him. The boy opened his eyes, seeing those same blue eyes again. His mind was clear once more, but at the same time, the shackles of his curse loosened. The princess kept trying to camouflage him, with little success. The boy heard someone saying that the princess was covered in mud. He saw Ravi carrying the baby in the distance and wondered what on earth that had been. Back at the castle, Mabel felt hotter than usual. She thought it was because of the picnic they had during the day. Her body was burning. In truth, she had a strong fever. Rufy was worried and shouted for someone to get help. But to Mabel, her voice sounded muffled. She sneezed. Her health was like that because they ended up getting caught in a sudden rain on the way back. Back at the palace, she had taken a bath and changed clothes. But even so, she apparently got sick from a small drizzle. She had actually managed to catch a cold in the summer. The doctor and the emperor arrived in the room. The man stated it was just a cold caused by the chill. All the servants looked downcast, and Mabel's face was entirely red. Approaching the crib, the emperor thought about the small child. Just a simple cold was enough for something like this to happen. He held her hand. The emperor thought that if only he could trade places with her, he would do it without hesitation. The doctor said the medicine should bring her fever down soon. Worried, the emperor asked if he was sure. The doctor said yes, he had only given her a fever reducer. Oscar said he was sure Mabel's condition would improve, just like the man said. He also explained that with so many people around, it might slow down her recovery. Opening the door, a man called for His Majesty, saying he had urgent news. Irritated, the emperor turned to him. Realizing his mistake, the servant hesitated a little, but ended up entering. He apologized, explaining that the matter was so urgent that he had to come even now. The emperor gave him permission to speak. The man explained that the demon of Devlin had escaped. Surprised, the emperor asked how. He said that according to witnesses, the boy easily broke free from the enchanted chains and fled after knocking out the guards and soldiers. The emperor then asked for his current whereabouts. The man said there was a trail of blood leading to the northern forest, but from there they had lost the trail. The Emperor then realized that this forest was the same place where Mabel had been by the lake. He mentally thanked the heavens they hadn't met. He said that the boy probably hadn't yet found a way to escape the palace grounds and ordered the gates to be sealed, also warning to keep the seasonal guards on alert. No one was allowed to leave or enter without authorization. Moreover, he wanted Mabel's security increased tenfold. The man was surprised, saying that he had already ordered the security to be increased 20-fold. Thoughtfully, with a hand on his chin, the Emperor said he had done well. He continued explaining that the focus would be to search the northern forest where the blood trail had been. Then he asked everyone to leave. Oscar thought his father wouldn't be coming with them. The door closed loudly, and the Emperor sat next to Mabel's crib. Caressing his daughter, he asked her to be well. He noted that she was so small and delicate. The Emperor also thought that his daughter would have her share of illnesses as she grew. He felt he didn't know if he could bear the shock and pain in his heart every time that happened. He didn't know if he was strong enough. He might possess the largest territory on the continent and countless riches. But again and again, he had failed to protect what was most important. His memories brought back his late wife, Sienna. He remembered sitting at the edge of her bed as she said she never should have asked him to give her up in exchange for their child. Sienna said that even so, in the end, he didn't deny her wish. Clenching his fist, the Emperor explained that it was because it was a direct request from her. He wouldn't deny it. She called him a liar, saying that he never intended to give up on either of them. Sienna explained that staying away from him was a great cruelty, but the only thing she could offer was an apology. She tried to stretch out her hand, but her strength gave out halfway. Apologizing, she called him by his name, Evan. The Emperor thought that this was never what he wanted, denying it mentally. He didn't want an apology. He didn't want her apologies to be the last words they ever exchanged. Evan cried while holding the hand of his deceased wife. He thought that losing her had left a permanent scar. But this child, he promised he would at least keep her safe. He would never let her suffer any harm, but he doubted his ability to ensure that. Maybe Mabel would end up leaving him just like Sienna had. Evan was afraid that in the future it might happen again. He even considered giving up. But looking at his hand, he questioned what he was thinking. The Emperor apologized and, remembering his wife, said that as her father, he would protect her no matter what happened, because that was his responsibility. In Mabel's past life, she remembered feeling hot and dizzy. At that rate, she would probably die. No matter how long she stayed there, no one would come help her. Trying to stand, the girl thought she needed some medicine. Looking through the drawers in the house, she found some expired medication, and unfortunately, she didn't have money to buy more. Regardless, more importantly, she didn't even have water. She forced herself to swallow. At that point, her father had been away from home for over a month, and her mother had completely abandoned her. She had never come back. The girl wondered, maybe her parents didn't actually love her. Lying on a sheet, she thought that all the other kids always had someone to look after them, wondering how she was supposed to do everything alone. Blinking, she questioned why people always looked at her with pity whenever she went outside. Closing her eyes, the young girl wondered why she always had to be alone. She wanted to know. Maybe if she knew the reason, all that loneliness would go away. But there was no one around who could answer her. She heard a male voice. Maybe it was her father. Maybe he had returned home. That would be nice and all. She heard the Emperor's voice calling her Mabel and asking her to get better, so that they could play together again. Then she realized it was all just a dream in which she had become someone else. But in reality, she was still Gyul Yoon, and her father actually wasn't there for her. Hearing again the Emperor's voice promising to protect her, maybe he wasn't really her father. However, it was everything she had always wanted. And even if it was just a dream, those words were kind and warmed her heart. The girl thought that believing in those words would only hurt her. Despite that, just for now she wanted it. Just to dream anyway. And smiling in her sleep, Mabel wondered if she could be forgiven for everything she did in dreams. Next to her crib, the Emperor Evan smiled. In the end, she wished this small dream would last a little longer. At dawn, Mabel hiccuped. As she woke up with the sunlight, she stretched. Putting her hand on her forehead, she noticed there was a cold compress. Mabel suddenly remembered that she had caught a cold. Still on the topic, she recalled the fever and dizziness she had felt. But now she felt fine. It was a relief. Thinking that she was sure she had been dreaming, but couldn't remember what it was about. A vague memory suggested that her father had been in it. She shook her head, as if trying to push the image away. She decided that it didn't matter. If he had really appeared, it must have been a nightmare, so it wasn't worth remembering. The princess raised her arm, and after that, she continued stretching. She then noticed that beside her crib, the emperor was asleep, sitting. Frozen, the girl wondered what he was doing in her room at that hour. He woke up and, blinking, began to orient himself. Seeing Mabel, the emperor smiled. Approaching, he said she was awake. She hesitated while he checked her temperature carefully, confirming it had returned to normal. The relief was visible in his expression. Mabel struggled to understand the absurd situation. Why was the emperor of all people caring for her instead of her nanny? The emperor murmured praises about her bravery in taking the bitter medicine. His voice carried an unusual fatigue, and it seemed like he hadn't slept properly the previous night. Mabel then realized that what had happened last night wasn't just a dream. The person who had watched over and cared for her all night was the emperor himself. She began to cry. Worried, he picked her up in his arms, asking what she was feeling. She felt that his touch was gentle. His voice was sweet and caring. Mabel realized that he truly loved her like a daughter, but she didn't understand why. She didn't understand what she had done to deserve to be loved like that. And more importantly, she vividly remembered her past life, where she saw how human feelings could change with frightening speed. That bitter lesson now darkened her perception of the present, making her question every gesture of kindness. The anxiety lingered like a weight on her chest. No matter how much the emperor showed care, she couldn't let go of the deep-rooted distrust. From the open window, a breeze passed through the room. Mabel took a deep breath, recognizing the delicate scent of summer flowers drifting in the air. Madame Ruffet asked for the windows to be closed. The room had been aired enough. Larima agreed and did it. Mabel was surprised by how quickly it was done. Although she understood that she was recovering from a cold and shouldn't be in cool places, she still argued with herself that a little fresh air wouldn't hurt, but knew protesting would be pointless. There wasn't even a chance for a short walk outdoors for now. Her caretakers had systematically removed any object that could pose even the slightest risk. They took out furniture like the chandelier, and even her toys. Her favorite plushie, a gift from Larima, was also taken away. They removed every little thing from her room. She thought they were being far too overprotective. The girl pouted, scrunching her face in frustration. Rufy asked what was troubling the princess. Mabel was feeling more bored than ever. Oscar opened the door and greeted her. He said today was a really hot day while fanning himself. The nanny offered him iced tea. He accepted and thanked her. Oscar held Mabel and asked if she was having a good day, thinking that since Oscar was here, Lisandro would be coming too. She then stared past the door, her eyes narrowing when she saw him. Someone asked what she was looking at. Mabel opened her arms and shouted the only word she knew. Hurt, Lisandro stepped back. Oscar laughed when he saw her angry expression, asking if she really didn't like her uncle. Mabel thought she was doing all this for him. Oscar tried to ease the tension, asking Mabel not to hate Lisandro so much. She was confused. Her brother said that not long ago, Lisandro used to make time to play with him. Everything changed when he took on the responsibility of tutor, teaching both academic subjects and fencing. Everyone thought he seemed different while waiting outside. Oscar added that Lisandro wasn't a bad person. He just wanted what was best. Mabel squeezed Oscar. She thought she was pushing him away so Oscar could breathe. And now, with him defending Lisandro like that, Mabel felt like the bad one. Changing the subject and avoiding Mabel's gaze, Oscar asked Ravi to fetch the books from the servant outside. He agreed. Bringing the books in, Mabel was surprised by how many there were. Oscar explained that these were his study materials. She thought it was way too much, finding it scary. Wondering if they would be as difficult as the complicated book he had read before, the girl decided to check for herself, pulling a random volume. She thought she had no idea. After all, the protagonist couldn't read it, complaining that God had been unfair not to give her the ability to understand the writing of this world. The pages were completely indecipherable to her. With a sigh, she decided to peek at the book Oscar was reading. Her eyes lit up when she found pages full of colorful illustrations. Finally, something she could understand. She made a sound, trying to ask what it was. Oscar explained that it was a map of the continent. The princess became interested. Oscar didn't understand why she hadn't shown the same interest in his last book. She thought it was obvious. She wasn't interested in Algor Chekhov's arguments. Her fingers stopped on a page with a detailed map, but familiarizing herself with the geography of this continent seemed useful. Placing his hand on the book, Oscar said it was okay, and pointed to the place where they lived, the Ermino Empire. He explained that it was the largest country of all, holding that territory for 500 years since the Great Expansion. Mabel was amazed. Oscar pointed to another region on the map. He explained that it was the Holy Empire of Abelardo, where those priests came from. Realizing he had touched on a complicated topic, he decided to move on and ask them to forget that for now. His finger slid to another area, saying that this was the Kingdom of Persea. And then came the Kingdom of Bargata. Mabel watched with growing admiration. Oscar, only 6 years old, identified each territory without difficulty. She thought the boy was really smart, blessed, or maybe something like a genius. Oscar explained that to the left of Bargata lies the Kingdom of Helene. Mabel felt impressed and a bit embarrassed. That boy had the entire map memorized, easily surpassing her own knowledge despite her age and experience advantage. Mabel examined another area of the map. She thought that this territory was the second largest, only behind Ermino. She turned to Oscar with curiosity while pointing. He stayed silent for a moment. Then he explained that it was the Empire of Devlin. The name brought an immediate association to Mabel's mind. The demon of Devlin was still fresh in her memory. She wondered if the boy had managed to escape safely. Oscar added that Devlin and Ermino do not maintain friendly relations. He said the Devlin Empire constantly invades, trying to conquer their lands. Mabel recalled the behavior of Priest Montague during his visit. The representative from the Holy Empire of Abelardo also showed caution toward Devlin. Oscar said that Abelardo lies between the two empires, serving as a buffer zone. But despite that, there were significant wars between them in the past. And since they shared a long northern border with Devlin, they had to remain constantly alert. Mabel was deep in thought. Oscar continued, saying that there was a new conflict on the border recently, and their troops were completely annihilated. They say a single fighter was responsible for all the casualties. The idea of one person wiping out an entire army defied all logic to her. Closing the book, Oscar wondered what he was doing talking about that to a child, saying she wouldn't understand. Outraged, Mabel thought that he was a child too. And in her mind, she said she understood perfectly. Oscar said he would read many other books to her later. For now, Oscar said she could do something with him. He told the girl to first open her hand and then shape her fist a certain way. The princess copied him with a blank expression. Mabel thought that she wasn't even 1 year old, and therefore had no use for knowledge about the Empire's current situation. So she could just enjoy and play with Oscar. Laughing, Larima told Rufy to look at them playing. Oscar said she was doing it right. That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the story. This one is more of a slow burn, but I really love seeing the characters develop. What do you think is going to happen with Mabel? Will she and the Demon of Devlin fall in love? Was he misunderstood and not actually responsible for all those deaths? Will Mabel be less bored in the next chapters? Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Kisses!